In the next few movies, I want to introduce you to a family of filters which are all located in what's called the blur gallery. You can access these filters from the filter pull-down menu, and here these allow us to shift the focus in our photographs by adding different types of blur. Typically, when you're working with these blur effects, what you'll want to do is work with them as smart filters. So before you actually access the filter, go to the filter pull-down menu and choose Convert for Smart Filters. Here we'll click OK in order to convert our layer to a smart object layer. Next, navigate to the filter pull-down menu and then choose Blur and then select the type of blur that you want to work on. Let's start off using iris blur, as perhaps this is the easiest to understand and to work with, at least initially. Now when we click on any of these menu items, what will happen is it will launch our image in what's called the blur gallery. Here you'll notice that the Photoshop interface will disappear, and we have some different panels and on-screen controls. Now we can click and drag this around. In doing that, we can control the area that's affected by the blur. Here you can see the area inside of this shape is protected. The area on the outside, well, that's where the blur effect is being applied. Now you can change the intensity of the effect by using this slider here, click and drag in order to increase the blur or decrease the blur. We can also use the slider on the right. Currently, we're working with iris blur, so we can simply drag the slider in order to customize how that blur effect appears. Next, what I want to do is zoom in on the photograph. You can zoom in and zoom out inside of the blur gallery just like in Photoshop. Press Command+ on a Mac or Control+ on Windows. Next, I'll press the spacebar key and click and drag in order to reposition the photograph so that we can view this better. Well, what's the deal with this overlay? Well, the iris blur allows us to create a shape, and that shape protects part of the image, whereas the rest of the photograph has the blur effect being applied. You can change this shape by simply positioning your cursor over the edge of that, and here you can see I can change this either by clicking and dragging it this way or by clicking and dragging it this way. By changing the shape of this protected area, you can make a blur effect which fits your photograph. Next, we have these little solid circles. Well, in order to see how those work, what I'm going to do is exaggerate. And here I'm going to really exaggerate. Notice that now I just have this center area protected in my photograph, and that area extends out to the solid circles. Well, if you click and drag those in, you're just protecting this area inside of this shape. The rest, well, it all has that blur effect applied. And here we can click and drag these all the way out to this outer edge if we want to protect a larger area. As we do that, we'll notice that it's creating a transition from this point out to where it's fully blurred out. Well, here obviously we have too much blur applied, so what I need to do is scale this back. We'll just drag the slider to the left in order to remove some of that or to lessen that blur effect. When you're adding blur to your photographs, you want it to look realistic or appealing, not necessarily overwhelming. All right, well, here in this case, I have the center of my blur area right on top of the subject. It's right on top of her nose. Well, that's a little bit distracting. It would be great, of course, if we could hide all of those overlay interface elements. Well, we can do that. Simply press the H key and hold that down to hide those, and then let go of the H key, and it will bring those controls back. What I like to do as I'm evaluating how I'm working with these different types of blur is to press and hold H, then to click on the preview checkbox. That will show you the before, and then click again, and that will show you the after. And then, of course, after you've previewed that, let go of the H key so that you can then see the controls. Well, here with this photograph, I'll go ahead and click and drag this down a little bit and extend the size of the shape. I want to have a little bit more of the subject in focus, so I'm just clicking and dragging this around until I have a nice area of focus. Now, I accidentally dragged the slider there. That's way too high, so I'll go ahead and bring that back. The great thing, of course, about using these is that we have a lot of flexibility with how we dial this in. All right, great. Well, let's apply this effect to the photograph. To do so, click OK. That will take the image out of the blur gallery and back into Photoshop. Well, here in Photoshop, we now have our smart filter. If I reposition the photograph, you can really see that the subject's face is in focus, the background and some of the lower area of the image is out of focus. We can turn that on and off by clicking on this eye icon here. Here is before the blur gallery effect was applied, and now here is the after. We can also re-access those controls by double-clicking the word blur gallery, That will then relaunch the image inside of the blur gallery with the settings which we last applied. Here we can customize this further. If we want to change the way that this appears, I'll go ahead and click and drag this just around a little bit and increase the overall blur. Next, after you've customized that so that it looks good, click OK in order to apply that. And again, when you do that, that will apply that blur effect and then show your image inside of Photoshop, and it will also show you the smart filter layers where you can view the overall before and then now the after.